Evelyn Monroe, a young billionaire heiress, pretended to be paralyzed to test the man she had trusted with her heart. What she discovered was more shocking than the accident itself. While her wealthy husband revealed his true colors through cold detachment and hidden schemes, an unlikely ally, her longtime caretaker Marcus Johnson, showed her the kind of loyalty that money could never buy. This wasn't just about love or betrayal anymore. It was about dignity, deception, and uncovering who stood by her when the mask of luxury was stripped away. And when Evelyn decided to fight back, she turned her supposed weakness into the most powerful weapon her husband never saw coming. "Are you sure you can't feel anything below your knees?" Daniel asked again, his voice lacking genuine concern as his eyes darted back to the glowing screen of his cell phone. He repeated the question for the third time that morning, but Evelyn Monroe had already stopped expecting warmth in his words. Lying still in the expansive hospital-style bed set up inside her Beverly Hills mansion, she observed every flicker across his face, every impatient sigh, and every absent glance. At just 28 years old, Evelyn had inherited control of a pharmaceutical empire worth nearly $200 million. She never imagined she would have to resort to pretending she was paralyzed in order to measure the sincerity of the man she had married only 6 months earlier. The accident 3 days ago, a supposed fall down the marble staircase, had been staged well enough to convince doctors, staff, and Daniel alike. The diagnosis looked dire: complete paralysis, possibly permanent. "The doctor said it could take months before we know for sure if I'll ever walk again," she murmured softly, carefully studying Daniel's reaction. "You'll stay with me through all of this, won't you?" Daniel hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but that pause spoke louder than any words. 4 weeks, Evelyn had sensed something off. Hidden phone calls, messages erased before she could glance at them, questions about her will that felt far too casual. That small break in his response confirmed every doubt clawing at her. "Of course, darling," Daniel finally said, plastering on a thin smile. But even as the words left his mouth, he was rising from the chair at her bedside. "I need to run to the office. Urgent business. I'll be back before you know it." The moment he left, the air in the room changed. A gentle knock at the door signaled Marcus Johnson's entrance. At 45, Marcus had been the caretaker and janitor of the Monroe estate for over 15 years, long before Daniel ever walked into Evelyn's life. His dark eyes carried warmth that no amount of money could buy, and his respectful greeting carried more sincerity than her husband's entire morning visit. "Good morning, Miss Evelyn," Marcus said, pushing a cleaning cart into the room. "How are you feeling today?" The contrast couldn't have been sharper. While Daniel rushed off with excuses, Marcus approached her bedside with genuine care. He adjusted her pillows, checked the blanket, and made sure the room temperature was comfortable. "You don't need to fuss over me, Marcus," Evelyn whispered, though inside, her resolve strengthened. This wasn't only a test of Daniel's loyalty. It was also confirmation of the advice her lawyer had given after uncovering unusual financial movements under her husband's name. She hated the thought, but it seemed necessary. Daniel's footsteps faded down the hall, followed by the sound of the front door closing. He hadn't even said a proper goodbye. Marcus stayed, quietly tidying up, occasionally glancing at her with concern. His presence was steady, unhurried, almost grounding. "Mr. Marcus," Evelyn called softly, "could you do me a favor? If I need anything today, could you stay nearby?" His eyes brightened with surprise but also with determination. "Of course, Miss Evelyn. I'll put aside the other tasks. You shouldn't be alone right now." That small promise was the first clear sign of what lay ahead. While her husband abandoned her during the most vulnerable moment of her life, Marcus demonstrated the loyalty and kindness Evelyn had been yearning for. What Daniel didn't know was that his absence, his excuses, and his disinterest were all being noted carefully. Evelyn wasn't just a wealthy young woman, she was a strategist. She had learned long ago how to read people, and this test was already revealing who truly cared. As Marcus gently adjusted the curtains to block the harsh sunlight, Evelyn realized something important. This charade she had started might be the only way to uncover the truth about her marriage. And though the test had only begun, she already saw who was failing miserably, and who was quietly passing with flying colors. If you're drawn into this story of loyalty, betrayal, and hidden strength, stay with us. Because what happens when a powerful woman decides to fight back will leave you stunned in ways you never imagined. The following morning, Evelyn awoke to the faint hum of voices drifting in from the hallway. The door to her bedroom was slightly ajar, and through the gap she could make out Daniel's low, tense tone. He was pacing, cell phone pressed tight against his ear, his words clipped and sharp. "No, it can't be permanent. You need to get another opinion," he muttered, agitation clear in his voice. "What do you mean we'll have to wait and see? That's not good enough." Evelyn closed her eyes quickly when she heard his footsteps approaching. A moment later, Daniel entered, balancing a tray with coffee and breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air, but Evelyn immediately noticed the presentation was too neat, too thoughtful to have been his idea. She knew Marcus's careful hands were behind it. "Good morning, sweetheart," Daniel greeted her with a strange smile, setting the tray on the bedside table. "How was your night?" Evelyn studied his face carefully. His expression mimicked concern, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed something else: frustration, impatience, even annoyance. "I barely slept," she admitted honestly. "Sometimes I think I can feel something in my legs, but then nothing happens when I try to move. It's confusing." For a brief moment, Daniel's face tightened. It was almost imperceptible, but Evelyn caught it. A flicker of irritation, not empathy. He wasn't waiting for her recovery. He was waiting for confirmation one way or another, to decide what to do next. "I brought you your favorite coffee," he said, his tone stiff, almost mechanical. "I have to leave early today. I've got a meeting with investors about that new expansion project I told you about." Evelyn's mind instantly recalled their argument just 3 weeks before the accident. Daniel had proposed bold investments that would require full access to the pharmaceutical company's accounts. She had stalled, insisting the board of directors needed to review the plan. But now, with her supposedly incapacitated, Daniel as her spouse could potentially make decisions in her name. "Daniel," she said softly, eyes fixed on him, "do you think I'll really be okay? I mean truly okay?" He froze for a fraction of a second, then forced a quick nod. "Of course you will. Doctors do incredible things these days. Miracles happen all the time." His response landed like ice water. There was no certainty in his voice, no genuine confidence, just a vague attempt at reassurance that rang hollow. Evelyn watched him leave soon after, claiming he couldn't be late. The door shut behind him, leaving only silence. Moments later, Marcus entered quietly to collect the untouched breakfast tray. His movements were calm, respectful, but Evelyn noticed the way he glanced at her, almost as though he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Miss Evelyn," he said gently, "if you don't mind me asking, is everything all right beyond the medical issues?" The question caught her off guard. Marcus had worked for her family for over 15 years, yet he had never crossed the line into personal matters. But now, his voice carried something else, a concern that went deeper than his role. "Marcus," she began carefully, lowering her voice, "have you noticed anything unusual around here? Before my accident, I mean." Marcus hesitated. As a middle-aged black man working for a wealthy family, he had always been cautious about what he said. But after a moment he gave a slow nod. "Well, ma'am, it's not my place, but I have noticed Mr. Daniel taking a lot of private calls. And there have been visitors when you weren't home." Evelyn's stomach clenched. "Visitors?" "Yes. Some lawyers, a couple of brokers, and a young woman. She came by 3 times last week, when you were in San Francisco visiting your sister." Evelyn felt a wave of cold rush through her body. Daniel had urged her to make that trip, insisting it would be good to spend time with family before the marriage settled into routine. At the time, she found his insistence unusual. Now it made sense. "Marcus, tell me honestly," she whispered, her eyes locking with his. "Can I trust you?" His gaze didn't waver. "Miss Evelyn, I've worked in this house since you were a teenager. I watched you grow into the woman who fought for her place in the business world, even when people doubted you. If you need someone in your corner, you can count on me." The sincerity in his voice pierced straight through her guarded heart. For the first time in days, Evelyn felt the faintest glimmer of safety. "Marcus," she whispered, her decision made. "I believe my husband is trying to take everything from me. And I need proof before it's too late." He didn't flinch. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he leaned forward slightly and asked calmly, "What do you need me to do?" Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. "First, I need cameras set up around the house. Discreet ones. Second, I need you to keep track of visitors when Daniel thinks I'm asleep or distracted. And third," she paused, realizing just how far she was about to go, "I need your help looking into my bank accounts." For a moment, Marcus stayed silent. Then his posture straightened, his expression hardening with resolve. "Miss Evelyn, your family has always treated me with respect. If anyone is trying to harm you, especially now when you're most vulnerable, I won't hesitate to help you find out the truth." That afternoon, while Daniel disappeared into yet another urgent meeting, Marcus worked quietly, placing miniature cameras in strategic corners of the mansion. Daniel's office, the main living room, and the grand entrance. Evelyn watched from her wheelchair, a mix of fear and determination rising in her chest. What Daniel didn't realize was that his wife wasn't the fragile victim he thought she was. She was a fighter, always had been. And now, with Marcus as her ally, she was ready to prove that underestimating her would be the gravest mistake of his life. That night, her phone buzzed with a message. Daniel's text was short: "Meeting running late. Don't wait up." Evelyn's lips curled into the faintest smile. He thought he was buying himself freedom. In reality, he had just given her the time and space she needed to build her case. The game had begun. Over the next several days, the Monroe mansion began to feel less like a home and more like the center of a quiet investigation. With each camera Marcus carefully positioned, Evelyn felt as though she was regaining small pieces of control that Daniel believed she had lost. She spent hours in her wheelchair reviewing the layout of the estate, noting which rooms gave Daniel the most privacy and which corners would best reveal the truth. By the end of the week, the mansion was wired. Hidden cameras captured the office Daniel now spent hours pacing in, the foyer where he often welcomed uninvited visitors, and even the long dining hall where hushed conversations seemed to echo louder than anywhere else. Marcus made sure every device was invisible, blending perfectly with ornate fixtures and expensive artwork. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her room scrolling through the first batch of recordings on her tablet. Her breath caught when she saw the footage. Daniel, standing in his office, phone pressed tight against his ear, whispering to a woman whose name he spoke with ease. "Yes, Isabella, I promise. It won't be long now. The doctor said it could be permanent, so maybe it's time we move forward with our plans," he murmured. His voice carried the kind of tenderness he never used with Evelyn anymore. Evelyn's stomach turned. She had suspected there was someone else, but hearing the confirmation, seeing the look on his face, it made the betrayal sting sharper than she expected. The recordings grew worse over the following days. Daniel met with an attorney, a tall man with silver hair who introduced himself as Charles Grant, a specialist in high-profile divorces. Evelyn watched the conversation unfold later on her laptop, her hands trembling as she hit play. "With her current condition," Charles explained matter-of-factly, "there's legal ground to argue temporary mental incapacity due to trauma. That would allow you to take certain financial responsibilities into your own name. From there, asset transfers become much easier." Evelyn froze, bile rising in her throat. He wasn't just planning to leave her, he was actively plotting to strip her of the empire she had fought to protect. When Marcus entered the room later that night carrying tea, she barely looked up. But he could see the tension etched across her face. "Miss Evelyn," he said softly, setting the tray on the nightstand, "I found out more about the woman he's been calling." He handed her a manila folder filled with printouts, photographs, and notes. Evelyn opened it slowly, bracing herself for what she already knew deep down. "Her name is Isabella Torres," Marcus reported, his voice steady. 24. A model and aspiring actress. She's been living in an upscale downtown apartment. Rent's been paid by Daniel for the past 6 months, beginning 3 weeks before your wedding. Evelyn's grip tightened on the papers. She scanned receipts of wire transfers, screenshots of bank records, and photographs of Daniel entering the building late at night. The betrayal wasn't casual, it was carefully orchestrated, calculated, and planned before she ever walked down the aisle. "He didn't just cheat on me," Evelyn whispered, her throat tight. "He married me to gain access. Everything about him was a setup." Marcus remained silent, letting her absorb the truth. His quiet presence was steadying, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone in the fight. After a long pause, Evelyn looked up. "Marcus, I need more than proof of the affair. I need to know exactly what he's doing with my company's accounts. If he's moving money, we have to catch him in the act." That evening, with Marcus's help, Evelyn wheeled herself quietly into Daniel's office. Marcus knew every squeaky hinge and loose floorboard, guiding her through the mansion like a ghost. Together, they accessed the company accounts from Daniel's computer. What Evelyn found nearly made her sick. Multiple wire transfers, over $2 million, had been funneled into an account she didn't recognize. The documents showed Daniel had signed them under a temporary medical power of attorney, citing Evelyn's unstable mental condition following her accident. "Unbelievable," she muttered, her voice low and raw. "He's stealing from me while I sit here pretending to be broken." For the first time since the charade began, Evelyn allowed her anger to surface. Her hands gripped the armrests of her chair, knuckles white. Marcus stood silently nearby, watching her but saying nothing. Then her eyes hardened, determination replacing grief. "If Daniel wants to use my condition against me, then I'll use it to destroy him." The very next morning, Evelyn gave Marcus instructions to contact the one lawyer she trusted above anyone else. Rebecca Lane, a top corporate fraud attorney known for dismantling schemes twice as complex as this one. But to avoid raising suspicion, Rebecca would arrive at the mansion under the guise of a medical rehabilitation specialist. Over the next several days, Rebecca visited discreetly, carrying a clipboard and wearing scrubs. To Daniel, she appeared to be checking Evelyn's progress. In reality, she was gathering evidence, carefully documenting every fraudulent transfer Marcus had uncovered. Daniel, oblivious, grew bolder. One afternoon, Evelyn pretended to be asleep in her room when the cameras caught Isabella stepping into the mansion for the first time. Evelyn watched later, jaw tight, as Daniel paraded her around the house, showing her the family's artwork, sculptures and antiques. "Soon all of this will be ours," he whispered to the young woman, his hand brushing over her shoulder. "And you're sure she won't find out?" Isabella asked, fingers tracing a priceless vase that had been in the Monroe family for generations. Daniel smirked, arrogance dripping from his tone. "She can barely get out of bed. Even if she could, the transfers are already complete. The lawyer said her mental state makes it nearly impossible to undo anything." Evelyn slammed her tablet shut, fury boiling in her veins. That night, as Marcus checked in on her, she whispered with cold precision, "He thinks I'm powerless. But he's about to learn exactly how wrong he is." 3 days later, Evelyn decided to test Daniel in the most direct way yet. She staged a sudden medical relapse, one that would require his immediate attention. Marcus played his role perfectly, phoning Daniel during what appeared to be a critical moment. Evelyn listened from the extension line, her heart pounding, waiting for his reaction. "Mr. Daniel," Marcus said with urgency, "Miss Evelyn's condition has worsened. The doctor insists you come home right away. She needs you here." On the other end, Daniel sighed heavily, his voice laced with irritation. "Marcus, I'm in the middle of a very important dinner meeting. Give her the medication and call me back if it gets worse. Don't drag me away unless it's absolutely necessary." Evelyn's chest tightened. She knew exactly what kind of meeting he was having. Wine glasses clinking in the background, laughter that didn't belong to a boardroom. He was with Isabella, spending her company's money on luxury meals while brushing aside his sick wife as if she were an inconvenience. The last shred of hope Evelyn had been clinging to snapped. Daniel had failed the simplest test of loyalty, to choose her over his mistress when she was supposedly gravely ill. At that moment she made her final decision. "Tomorrow," she whispered to Marcus with cold certainty, "we're making a very important phone call. It's time Daniel learns that not everyone in a wheelchair is helpless." From that moment the game shifted. Evelyn no longer felt like she was merely reacting to Daniel's betrayal. She was taking control. Every lie, every wire transfer, every calculated absence had been carefully documented. Rebecca Lane had organized the evidence into a detailed dossier that no judge could ignore. But Evelyn had something even more powerful than financial records. Information about Daniel's past that could make the case against him bulletproof. Marcus had uncovered it quietly, sifting through Daniel's papers and discarded notes. There were old emails, half-shredded documents, and messages that revealed shady dealings dating back years. Fraudulent contracts, side businesses registered under false names, even tax evasion schemes. Daniel had been living a double life long before he married Evelyn, and now that history would be his downfall. The trap was set on a crisp Thursday afternoon. Daniel returned home expecting to find his wife asleep in her hospital bed, helpless as ever. Instead, when he stepped into the main living room, he froze. Evelyn was seated elegantly in her favorite armchair, her legs crossed with casual grace, a glass of wine in hand. "Hi, darling," she said softly, her voice calm but laced with steel. "How was your day stealing from my company?" Daniel's keys slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the silent house. His face went pale. "Evelyn, how are you walking?" She stood slowly, deliberately, every movement smooth and controlled. "Funny you should ask. Because I never lost the ability to walk at all." Daniel staggered backward, eyes wide. "What? That's impossible." The doctors saw what I wanted them to see," Evelyn interrupted coldly. "What you'd never expect because you were too busy planning my downfall to notice the truth. You'd like to know how I discovered Isabella, the fraudulent transfers, and your plans to have me declared unstable so you could seize my assets." His mouth opened, then closed again, no words forming. His hands trembled visibly. "Wait, Evelyn, I can explain." "Oh, no need," she said smoothly, lifting a tablet from the coffee table. "Everything is already documented. Every conversation, every signature, every night you spent in Isabella's apartment. I have it all, on video, in writing, and backed up where even you can't touch it." Daniel lunged toward her, desperation flashing in his eyes. But Marcus appeared silently at her side, no longer the quiet caretaker but standing firm as her protector. "Mr. Daniel," Marcus said evenly, his tone calm but unyielding, "I suggest you sit down." Daniel ignored him, his voice cracking. "Isabella means nothing to me. The investments, I was trying to grow our money. Evelyn, you have to believe me." Evelyn laughed, the sound sharp and chilling. "Our money?" Interesting choice of words for someone who stole nearly $2.5 million using fraudulent authority. "I saw the transfers myself. I saw you brag about how easy it would be to declare me incompetent. Don't insult me by pretending it was all for us." It was then that Daniel noticed the organized stack of papers on the coffee table, bank statements, photographs, legal documents, all meticulously labeled. And sitting calmly in the corner was Rebecca Lane, her sharp eyes watching everything, pen poised over her legal pad. "Meet Rebecca," Evelyn said casually. "The best fraud attorney in the state. She's been here under the guise of a rehabilitation specialist. Every move you made has been recorded, cataloged, and prepared for court." Daniel's face drained of color. He slumped onto the sofa, his body trembling with fear. "You planned all of this?" he whispered. Evelyn stepped closer, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "No, Daniel. I didn't plan your betrayal. You did that all on your own. I simply gave you the chance to reveal who you really are. And you did not disappoint." At that moment the doorbell rang. Marcus opened the door to reveal two detectives from the state's Financial Crimes Unit, followed by Rebecca carrying a heavy briefcase. "Mrs. Monroe," one of the detectives greeted, "we have the warrants you requested." Daniel's eyes widened in panic. "Wait, this is a mistake. Evelyn, please. We can work this out privately." Evelyn's laughter cut him off. "Privately? Like when you left me alone in that bed because you had a date with your mistress? Or when you plotted with a lawyer to have me declared unstable so you could steal everything my family built? No, Daniel. This ends here." The detective stepped forward, reading Daniel his rights as they snapped handcuffs around his wrists. He thrashed, desperate. "Evelyn, please, I love you." She leaned close, her voice a whisper only he could hear. "Love. You showed me exactly what your love looks like. Abandonment, lies, and greed. Marcus, a man you never even treated with basic respect, showed me more genuine care in 1 week than you did in 6 months of marriage." Daniel's pleas grew frantic as the detectives led him toward the door. "I can pay it back. Every penny." "Oh, you will," Evelyn replied coolly. "With interest. And damages. And Isabella's lease? Funny thing, it's under your corporate name. Consider her eviction notice my wedding gift to you." As the door slammed behind them, silence filled the mansion. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her hands no longer trembling. She turned to Marcus, who stood quietly by her side. "Marcus," she said softly, her eyes glistening, "thank you. You reminded me that true character shows itself when everything else is stripped away." He gave a modest smile, bowing his head slightly. "Miss Evelyn, you've always had the strength. You just needed someone to recognize it." Outside, the sound of sirens faded into the distance, carrying Daniel toward the consequences he had earned. Evelyn stood tall in the center of her home, knowing that for the first time in months she was in control again. What Daniel believed was weakness had been the perfect trap. And in his arrogance, he had delivered the rope for his own downfall. The arrest of Daniel Monroe sent shockwaves through Beverly Hills society, but inside the Monroe mansion, Evelyn felt an unfamiliar calm settle over her. For the first time since the so-called accident, she wasn't pretending anymore. She wasn't lying in bed waiting for scraps of attention from a husband who never truly loved her. She was standing on her own, watching her plan unfold exactly as she intended. Daniel had been led away in handcuffs, his desperate shouts fading into the night. Yet Evelyn knew this was only the beginning. Exposing his betrayal was one step, but ensuring that he paid for every crime, every fraudulent transfer, and every calculated act of neglect would take more work. The following morning, Rebecca Lane returned with updates. She spread papers across the dining table, her tone brisk but steady. "The financial records Marcus uncovered are airtight. Every transfer is logged, and the fact that he used a fraudulent medical power of attorney makes the case even stronger. He won't be able to argue his way out of this." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her fingers lightly tapping the armrest. "Good. I don't want loopholes. I don't want excuses. I want him to face every consequence." Rebecca nodded. "He will. I've already filed motions to freeze the suspicious accounts. That money is safe now, and once we're done, it'll be returned to the company." Marcus, who had been standing quietly nearby, finally spoke. "Miss Evelyn, I know you don't need me to say this, but you did the right thing. If you had stayed silent, he would have taken everything." Evelyn's lips curled into a small smile. "I didn't just do this for myself, Marcus. I did it because people like Daniel believe women like me are easy targets. He thought my wealth and position made me blind. He thought my accident made me weak. But he underestimated me, and he underestimated you." Marcus gave a modest shrug. "I only did what was right. Loyalty isn't complicated. You stand by the people who deserve it." Later that afternoon, Evelyn received word that Daniel was being held without bail. The evidence against him was too damning, and the judge had little patience for financial predators. Still, Daniel tried to send messages, calls through his lawyer, handwritten letters pleading for forgiveness, promises that he could change. Evelyn refused to read them. Each envelope went straight back, marked return to sender. While the legal process moved forward, Evelyn began the slow but deliberate task of reclaiming her life. The house, once filled with the stench of betrayal, now carried a new energy. Rooms that Daniel had filled with lies were transformed into workspaces where Evelyn and Rebecca strategized, while Marcus kept watch over every detail. One evening, Evelyn sat by the fire in the main living room, a glass of wine in hand. She stared at the flames, deep in thought, when Marcus entered quietly. "You've been working non-stop," he said softly. "You should rest." Evelyn looked up, her expression softer than it had been in weeks. "Rest will come when this chapter is closed." But for now I feel lighter. Do you know what it's like to carry suspicion for months? To wonder if the person sharing your bed is secretly waiting for you to fall apart. Marcus lowered himself into the chair across from her. I've seen it before. People put on masks when money and power are involved. But masks always slip eventually. Daniel's just happened to slip faster than most. Evelyn chuckled, a sound that felt foreign after so many tense days. And when it slipped, he fell flat on his face. Marcus smiled but said nothing. His presence was steady, reassuring, and Evelyn found herself grateful for it more than she could admit. Meanwhile, Daniel was adjusting to a far less glamorous reality. In the county detention center, the man who once strutted through luxury restaurants with a mistress on his arm was now crammed into a cell with 3 strangers. The food was bland, the noise constant, and the respect he thought he commanded had evaporated. Rumors spread quickly through the tabloids, painting him as a con artist who had married for money and been exposed by his own wife. Evelyn didn't read the articles at first, but Marcus clipped them out anyway, storing them in a folder. One day, he told her, you might want to look back and see just how far you've come. She nodded, though she wasn't sure. Her focus wasn't on revenge anymore. It was on rebuilding. On showing herself, and everyone else, that betrayal could never define her. 2 weeks later, Rebecca brought extraordinary news. The board of directors is not only standing with you, but they've also voted unanimously to expand into 3 new markets. They want you to lead the charge. Evelyn felt her chest swell with pride. Daniel had tried to steal her company, but instead she was about to grow it stronger than ever. Tell the board I'll be there, she said with quiet authority. And tell them I'm done letting anyone doubt me. That night, as she stood at her window overlooking the city, Evelyn thought about everything that had happened. Daniel's betrayal had nearly broken her. But Marcus's loyalty, Rebecca's sharp counsel, and her own determination had carried her through. And as the city lights flickered below, Evelyn whispered to herself, this isn't the end of my story. It's the beginning of the life I was always meant to lead. 6 months had passed since Daniel Monroe had been led away in handcuffs, and in that time, Evelyn's world had been transformed. The mansion that once echoed with betrayal now thrummed with renewal. The very walls that had witnessed lies and schemes had become a backdrop for growth, justice, and new beginnings. Evelyn sat at her desk one crisp morning, sunlight spilling through the tall windows of her office. She was no longer pretending to be weak, no longer confined to a bed she never needed. She was the CEO again, fully in command, reviewing contracts for the company's expansion into 3 new international markets. The empire Daniel had tried to dismantle was stronger than ever, its profits climbing nearly 40% since his arrest. Miss Evelyn, Marcus said as he entered the room, no longer in the plain uniform of a caretaker but wearing a tailored suit. He carried 2 cups of coffee, setting one in front of her with practiced ease. The lawyers confirmed it this morning. Daniel's final appeal was denied. He'll serve the full sentence, 7 years, no parole. Evelyn took the cup, smiling with quiet satisfaction. Justice has a way of catching up, doesn't it? Marcus nodded, but he didn't gloat. His dignity was as steady as ever, even though his own life had changed drastically in the past half-year. No longer the man pushing a cleaning cart through the mansion, he was now Evelyn's chief operating officer, a position she had created specifically for him after discovering not only his loyalty but also his sharp mind for strategy and problem-solving. The board, at first hesitant, had quickly realized what Evelyn already knew. Marcus was invaluable. His ability to see people clearly, to spot flaws in character and gaps in planning, made him a powerful ally in the boardroom as much as in the mansion. The man Daniel once dismissed as just the help, was now seated at the table with some of the most powerful business minds in the country. And Isabella? Evelyn asked, though she already suspected the answer. Marcus's mouth twitched into something between a smirk and a sigh. Arrested. 3 states filed charges. She'd been running the same scam for years, living off men who thought they were the only ones. Turns out Daniel wasn't unique, just foolish. Evelyn shook her head slowly, taking a sip of her coffee. She was never the real threat. He was. She just gave him the excuse he was looking for. Marcus leaned back in his chair. And he gave you the proof you needed to take back your life. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an envelope, delivered by a courier. Evelyn opened it with mild curiosity, then laughed as she scanned the contents. It was an invitation to a wedding. Rebecca Lane, the attorney who had helped her bring Daniel down, was marrying a prosecutor she'd met during the case. On the back of the invitation was a handwritten note. Thank you for reminding me that not every divorce case ends in bitterness. Sometimes it ends with the right people finding their place in the world. Evelyn smiled at the words, touched by the sentiment. She slipped the invitation onto her desk, feeling an odd sense of completion. Meanwhile, Daniel's life had become a mirror image of Evelyn's transformation. Inside the state penitentiary, his reality was stripped bare. Gone were the tailored suits and expensive meals, replaced by standard-issue uniforms and tasteless cafeteria food. His once commanding presence meant nothing behind bars. He tried, at first, to write Evelyn letters. Pages filled with apologies, promises of change, desperate pleas for another chance. Each one came back unopened, stamped in bold red letters, refused by recipient. He called Isabella, but she never answered. Without her wealthy husband's resources, she had moved on to her next target. The cruelest irony for Daniel came in the form of glossy magazines scattered around the prison library. He couldn't help but notice the headlines and photos splashed across their pages. Evelyn Monroe at gala events, Evelyn cutting ribbons at medical conferences, Evelyn seated beside her new right-hand man Marcus Johnson. Articles praised her as a visionary leader who had rebuilt her empire stronger than ever. And there, in photo after photo, was Marcus, no longer invisible but recognized as one of Beverly Hills' sharpest business minds. Daniel would stare at those images for hours, seething with jealousy and regret. He had lost everything: his freedom, his status, his wife. Worse, the man he once ignored, the man he never even bothered to greet properly, now lived the life Daniel had dreamed of. Back at the mansion, Evelyn stood once again at the tall window overlooking the gardens. She thought about the months that had passed, about the way her life had been ripped apart and then stitched back together in a stronger, more brilliant pattern. "Marcus," she said one evening, her voice softer than usual, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Miss Evelyn," he replied. "Why didn't you ever tell me you had an MBA? Why did you work as a janitor all those years?" Marcus smiled, an expression filled with both humility and pride. "Because honest work is never shameful. And because sometimes, being in the right place at the right time matters more than chasing recognition. If I hadn't been here, I might never have seen what kind of person you truly are. And you might never have seen me." Evelyn nodded slowly, deeply moved. Daniel had seen her wealth and tried to steal it. Marcus had seen her humanity and chosen to protect it. That was the difference, the measure of true character. "You saved me," she said quietly. "No, Miss Evelyn," Marcus corrected gently. "You saved yourself. I was just fortunate enough to stand beside you when you decided to stop pretending and start fighting back." As she looked at him across the desk, Evelyn realized that the story wasn't just about betrayal or revenge anymore. It was about discovery, about finding out who people really were when the mask slipped. Daniel had failed the simplest test of loyalty. Marcus had passed it with honor. And for the first time in years, Evelyn felt not just powerful but truly seen. 3 years later, the Monroe estate looked nothing like the house that had once sheltered secrets and betrayal. The atmosphere had shifted completely. Where there had once been tension in every corner, there was now warmth, laughter, and a sense of purpose. Evelyn's life had been rebuilt from the ground up, not as a reaction to what Daniel had done, but as a declaration of who she truly was. The pharmaceutical empire she inherited and expanded had become a national powerhouse. Evelyn's leadership had been featured in magazines, celebrated in industry conferences, and admired even by her fiercest competitors. Her story of resilience, pretending to be paralyzed to expose her husband's schemes, had never been made public, of course. But those who knew her closely understood that she carried a fire within her, one that no amount of betrayal could ever extinguish. Marcus was no longer simply her chief operating officer. His presence in her life had deepened far beyond titles or job descriptions. Over the years, he had proven himself as a brilliant strategist in the boardroom, a steady confidant in private, and the kind of man whose loyalty never wavered. Together they had become an unstoppable team, respected by peers, admired by employees, and quietly envied by those who had once written them off. One crisp autumn afternoon, Evelyn stood in the same garden where she had once wheeled herself out in secret to plot her survival. Now she walked freely, strong and confident, alongside Marcus. The leaves crunched beneath their feet as she turned to him with a smile. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked. Marcus chuckled softly. "Every day. I used to walk through this house with a mop in my hand. Now I walk into meetings where people actually stop to hear what I have to say. It's surreal sometimes." Evelyn stopped, facing him directly. "You earned every bit of it, Marcus. Don't ever think otherwise. You saw through Daniel long before I was ready to admit it. And you stood by me when I needed it most." His expression softened. "I didn't stand by you out of duty, Evelyn. I stood by you because it was right. And because I knew you deserved more than the lies he was feeding you." She held his gaze for a moment longer than usual, her heart tightening with unspoken words. Over time, the lines between gratitude, respect, and something deeper had blurred. But Evelyn wasn't the kind of woman to rush into anything blindly. She had learned the cost of misplaced trust. That night, she sat in her study, flipping through the latest issue of Forbes, which featured her on the cover. The headline read, "Evelyn Monroe, the CEO who turned betrayal into billion-dollar growth." She smiled faintly at the words, but her thoughts drifted elsewhere, to Marcus, to the way his steady presence had become the foundation of her life. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Daniel sat in a stark prison cell, his reality a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. 6 years into his sentence, his arrogance had been stripped away. His cell was cramped, his meals bland, his days monotonous. The letters he once sent to Evelyn had stopped. Every unanswered plea had chipped away at his pride until there was nothing left. Isabella had long since abandoned him, vanishing into the same shadows she came from. But the cruelest punishment wasn't the confinement. It was the knowledge that life outside had moved on without him. Other inmates left magazines scattered in the library, and Daniel couldn't help but notice the glossy photos of Evelyn and Marcus at charity galas, boardroom summits, and even red carpet events. They looked powerful, radiant, united. The empire he had tried to steal was thriving, without him, and because of the very man he had dismissed as invisible. Daniel would sit for hours staring at those pictures, his jaw clenched, hatred and regret burning inside him. He hadn't just lost money or freedom. He had lost the chance to stand beside a woman who could have given him everything. If only he had loved her for who she was instead of what she owned. Back at the mansion, Evelyn poured herself a glass of wine and joined Marcus in the living room. They sat across from each other, the fire casting a warm glow between them. "Do you ever regret it?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Regret what?" Marcus replied. "Not leaving. Not walking away when things got dangerous. You could have lost your job, your reputation, everything just by helping me." Marcus shook his head firmly. "No, Evelyn. I don't regret a thing. You were worth standing up for. You still are." Her chest tightened again, but this time she didn't push the feeling aside. Instead, she leaned back, letting the silence speak for her. 3 years after Daniel's downfall, Evelyn realized that the real victory wasn't his punishment, it was her freedom. Freedom to lead her company without manipulation. Freedom to live without fear. Freedom to finally see the people around her clearly. And most of all, freedom to let her heart rediscover what it felt like to be seen, respected, and valued, not for her wealth but for who she truly was. The chapter of betrayal had closed. What lay ahead was something far greater, something Evelyn had almost given up on: hope. The Monroe mansion was alive with a kind of energy it hadn't felt in years. Board meetings now took place in its grand dining room, charity dinners filled its halls with music and laughter, and Evelyn often found herself walking the same corridors that once echoed with secrecy, now filled with pride. But even in the midst of triumph, there were quiet moments when she reflected on how drastically life had shifted. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sky with orange and purple hues, Evelyn stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens. Marcus joined her, carrying 2 glasses of wine. He handed her one, their fingers brushing briefly, a small touch that carried more weight than either of them acknowledged out loud. "You've rebuilt more than just a company," Marcus said, his voice steady. "You've rebuilt yourself. That takes more strength than most people realize." Evelyn smiled faintly, sipping her wine. "I couldn't have done it alone. You were here when I had no one else to turn to. You saw me at my lowest and never looked away." He shrugged lightly. "That's what loyalty means. You don't abandon someone when it's inconvenient. You stand by them, especially when the storm is at its worst." She turned to look at him, her eyes softening. "Do you realize how rare that is? To find someone who doesn't just say they care, but proves it every single day." Marcus held her gaze, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The unspoken tension between them had been building for years, born not out of impulse but out of trust, respect, and shared battles. It was different from the infatuation she once mistook for love with Daniel. This was deeper, steadier, real. Meanwhile, Daniel's world was collapsing further. Prison had stripped him of every ounce of arrogance he once wore like a shield. His cell was cold, the nights endless, and the few friends he tried to make quickly turned on him once they learned of his past, of how he had tried to con his own wife and steal from the very empire she had built. To them he wasn't a mastermind. He was a fool who underestimated the wrong woman. What cut Daniel the deepest wasn't the physical discomfort of prison but the humiliation. Every magazine cover, every article, every news piece celebrated Evelyn's success while reminding the world of his failure. He saw Marcus's name mentioned more often now, praised as Evelyn's most trusted partner, a man who had risen from obscurity to become a respected voice in Beverly Hills business circles. The jealousy gnawed at Daniel until it felt like it would consume him whole. One rainy afternoon, Evelyn sat in her office flipping through reports when Marcus knocked and stepped inside. He carried an envelope, his expression unreadable. "This came for you," he said, handing it to her. Evelyn opened it carefully. It was another letter from Daniel. She scanned the first few lines, her jaw tightening as she read his desperate words. "Evelyn, I've changed. Prison has made me realize my mistakes. Please give me a chance to prove myself. I can be the man you thought I was." She stopped reading and tossed the letter back into the envelope. "Return to sender," she said flatly. Marcus studied her quietly. "You don't even want to finish it?" "No," Evelyn replied, her tone firm. "Daniel never loved me. He loved what I had. And now that he has nothing, he's reaching out because he wants something again. I won't let him steal another second of my life." Marcus nodded, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "That's strength, Evelyn. The kind of strength most people never find." That night, Evelyn found herself sitting by the fireplace again, Marcus beside her. The air between them was heavy with unspoken truths. She finally broke the silence. "Marcus, do you ever wonder if we're meant to cross paths with certain people just to learn what love isn't so we can recognize it when it's finally in front of us?" He turned to her slowly, his voice calm. "I think life has a way of showing us who's real and who's not. You saw Daniel's mask because you had to. And maybe you see me now because you're finally ready." Her breath caught, the weight of his words sinking deep. For the first time, Evelyn didn't look away. She allowed herself to feel the truth she had been holding back, the quiet realization that Marcus wasn't just her ally, her partner, her CO. He was the man who had shown her what it meant to be valued for who she was, not what she had. As the fire crackled softly, Evelyn leaned back and whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe it's time I stopped looking at the past and started seeing what's been in front of me all along." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibilities, of trust, of a love that had been patiently waiting to be acknowledged. For Evelyn, it wasn't about replacing Daniel. It was about realizing that true love doesn't come dressed in charm or promises. It comes quietly, steadily, in the form of someone who proves it day after day, even when no one is watching. And for the first time in years, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by betrayal, but by hope. Another year passed, and with it came a transformation that even Evelyn hadn't fully anticipated. The Monroe mansion, once marked by suspicion and shadows, now radiated warmth and purpose. It wasn't just a home anymore, it was a symbol of resilience. Every corner of the estate reflected the life Evelyn and Marcus were building together. Steady, honest, and grounded in trust. The two of them had fallen into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They spent mornings reviewing company reports side by side, afternoons meeting with investors or visiting labs, and evenings sharing quiet meals by the fireplace. What had once been an unspoken bond had deepened into something neither of them could deny anymore. It started with small gestures. Evelyn would notice the way Marcus remembered her favorite tea and always made sure it was stocked. Marcus, in turn, saw how Evelyn's shoulders eased when he was near, as though his presence lifted a weight she carried alone for too long. Slowly, the line between friendship and something more began to blur. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the tall windows, Evelyn sat at the piano in the parlor. She hadn't played in years, not since her father passed, but tonight her fingers moved over the keys almost without thought. The melody was soft, tentative, but honest. Marcus entered quietly, pausing at the doorway to listen. "You never told me you played," he said, his voice low. Evelyn looked up, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I used to. I stopped when life got complicated." He stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on the edge of the piano. "Maybe it's time to start again. You deserve things that bring you peace." Their eyes met, and in that moment the air shifted. No words were needed. The truth that had been hovering between them for years was finally undeniable. Evelyn realized that what she felt for Marcus wasn't just gratitude or admiration, it was love. Quiet, steady, undeniable love. Meanwhile, Daniel was drowning in his own ruin. 7 years into his sentence, the man who once believed he could outsmart everyone had become a ghost of himself. His hair had grayed, his posture slumped, his confidence shattered. In prison he wasn't feared or respected, he was pitied. He still saw Evelyn's face everywhere. Magazines in the library showed her standing proudly beside Marcus at award ceremonies, their company expanding into new international markets, her name synonymous with innovation and strength. Each headline was a dagger to his pride. The CEO who outshined betrayal. Monroe Pharmaceuticals expands by 60% under Evelyn Monroe's vision. And always, Marcus was at her side, no longer invisible but celebrated as the partner who helped her rebuild. Daniel wrote fewer letters now. He knew they would come back unopened. Yet some nights, when the loneliness was unbearable, he still scrawled out words of regret, words that never reached her. Deep down he understood the truth. He hadn't lost because Evelyn tricked him. He had lost because he never saw her for who she was. He never valued her heart, her strength, her humanity. And Marcus had. Back at the mansion, Evelyn found herself standing in front of the mirror one morning, adjusting a necklace Marcus had given her as a gift. It wasn't extravagant like Daniel's flashy jewelry. It was simple, elegant, and meaningful. On the inside of the clasp he had engraved one word: strength. She touched the pendant gently, smiling at her reflection. It wasn't just jewelry, it was a reminder of how far she had come, and who had been by her side through it all. Later that evening she and Marcus sat together on the terrace as the stars dotted the night sky. The air was crisp, the city lights glittering in the distance. Evelyn took a deep breath and finally spoke the words she had held back for too long. "Marcus," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, patient as always. "I'm listening." Her heart raced, but she pressed on. "I don't just trust you. I don't just rely on you. I love you. And I think I've loved you for longer than I realized." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Then Marcus reached for her hand, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Evelyn, I've loved you from the moment I saw the strength you carried, even when you doubted yourself. I never said it because I didn't want you to think it came from anything but truth." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from relief, from joy, from the realization that she had finally found the love she deserved. As they sat hand in hand, Evelyn knew her life had come full circle. Daniel had tried to strip her of everything, but in doing so, He had cleared the path for her to discover what truly mattered. Love built on trust, respect, and loyalty. She had been tested, betrayed, and nearly broken. But she had risen, stronger than ever. And now, for the first time, she wasn't just surviving. She was living. The news of Evelyn and Marcus's partnership, both personal and professional, spread quietly at first, whispered in boardrooms and charity galas. But soon it was undeniable. They no longer tried to hide the bond between them. Hand in hand at events, side by side in photographs, they presented themselves to the world not as CEO and COO alone, but as two people who had found something genuine in the aftermath of betrayal. At first, society didn't know what to make of it. Some critics raised eyebrows, murmuring that Evelyn had married beneath her status. Others called Marcus opportunistic. But Evelyn ignored them. She had lived through enough deception to know that outside opinions carried no weight compared to the truth. And the truth was simple. Marcus had stood by her when no one else did. He had proven himself again and again, not with words but with actions. Within the company, however, their partnership was celebrated. Employees admired Marcus for his insight and humility. They admired Evelyn for her courage and vision. Together, they created an atmosphere of respect that trickled down through every level of the business. The empire Daniel had tried to steal was thriving like never before, and now it had a human heartbeat at its core. One evening, Evelyn and Marcus attended a gala at a downtown hotel. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and cameras flashed as they entered together. Reporters called out questions, and for the first time, Evelyn didn't shy away from the truth. Yes, she told them with a calm smile, Marcus isn't just my business partner. He's my life partner. And I've never been prouder of the person by my side. The words echoed through the papers the next morning. Some praised her honesty, others criticized her choice. But Evelyn didn't care. For once, she wasn't living for anyone else's approval. She was living for herself. Meanwhile, in prison, Daniel's decline had reached its peak. He sat on the edge of his bunk one night, holding a worn magazine that featured Evelyn and Marcus on the cover of Business Today. The headline read, "From Scandal to Success, Evelyn Monroe and Marcus Johnson rewrite the rules of power." The photo showed Evelyn radiant in an elegant gown, Marcus at her side in a tailored suit, their hands linked. The image made Daniel's stomach churn. Rage twisted inside him, but beneath the anger was a gnawing emptiness he couldn't escape. He had once been the man at Evelyn's side, but he had squandered it with lies, greed, and betrayal. The other inmates mocked him relentlessly. "That your wife?" one sneered, pointing to the photo. "Looks like she upgraded, man." Laughter followed, loud and merciless. Daniel clenched his fists but stayed silent. Fighting wouldn't erase the truth. As the months dragged on, his letters stopped altogether. Even he couldn't stomach writing more empty promises. Instead, he replayed his mistakes over and over, each memory another chain around his neck. He had thought he was clever, thought he could manipulate his way into power. Instead, he had lost everything, and the man he once dismissed as a janitor was now living the life Daniel believed was his. Back at the mansion, Evelyn reflected on how far she had come. One evening, she and Marcus hosted a small dinner for close friends and colleagues. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter and clinking glasses. After the guests had left, Evelyn and Marcus remained on the terrace, the night air cool against their skin. "Do you ever think about what people say?" Marcus asked quietly. Evelyn shook her head. "Not anymore. People will always talk. But I know what's real. You're real. And that's all that matters." He smiled, pulling her hand into his. "Then let's keep building something real, together." She nodded, her heart steady. For so long she had feared love, associating it with betrayal and pain. But with Marcus it was different. It was safe. It was true. As the stars glittered above them, Evelyn realized she was living a life Daniel could never have given her. Not because he lacked money or charm, but because he lacked integrity. And integrity, she now knew, was the foundation of everything. That night, before heading inside, she whispered into the night air, "The best revenge is living well. And that's exactly what I'm doing." The Monroe mansion had seen its share of chapters. betrayal, heartbreak, renewal, but now it was preparing to host something entirely different. Evelyn stood in front of her mirror one morning, slipping into a simple ivory gown. The satin fabric glowed softly in the light streaming through the tall windows. She wasn't dressed like the heiress of a pharmaceutical empire or the CEO whose story filled magazine covers. Today she was simply a woman about to marry the man who had been her anchor, her confidant, and her truest companion. Marcus waited for her in the garden, where chairs were neatly arranged under an arch woven with white roses and lavender. It wasn't a grand event with hundreds of guests. Evelyn had chosen intimacy. The people gathered were those who had walked with her through her darkest days, close friends, loyal board members, and Rebecca Lane, the lawyer whose sharpness had helped expose Daniel's lies. The atmosphere was light, filled with genuine joy rather than empty formalities. As Evelyn walked down the path, all eyes turned to her. Marcus stood tall at the end of the aisle, wearing a crisp navy suit, his expression steady yet full of emotion. For years, he had been the man in the background, the janitor no one noticed, the caretaker others overlooked. But today he was the man who had captured the heart of a woman who had once been blind to what real love looked like. When she reached him, Marcus took her hands gently, his voice low but strong. "Evelyn, you've taught me that love isn't about status or titles. It's about standing together no matter the storm. I promise to keep standing with you, for the rest of my life." Her eyes glistened as she replied, "Marcus, you've shown me what true love looks like, steady, loyal, and real. You saw me when I felt invisible. You valued me when someone else tried to tear me down. I promise to honor that love, to grow with you, and to never forget the gift of finding you." The vows were simple, but they carried the weight of years of unspoken truths and battles fought side by side. When they sealed them with a kiss, the small crowd erupted in cheers. Evelyn felt an overwhelming sense of peace. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was real, built on scars, strength, and second chances. Far away, Daniel Monroe sat in a prison library flipping through an old newspaper. His heart stopped when he saw the photograph. Evelyn in her gown, radiant and strong, standing beside Marcus with a smile brighter than Daniel had ever seen her wear. The caption read, "Evelyn Monroe marries her longtime business partner and confidant, Marcus Johnson." The room around him blurred. For the first time, Daniel fully understood what he had lost. Not just wealth, not just power, but the chance to be loved by an extraordinary woman. He hadn't lost Evelyn because she had tricked him. He had lost her because he never valued her, never cared for her the way she deserved. In his cell that night, Daniel wrote one final letter. He poured every ounce of regret onto the page, begging for forgiveness, admitting the depths of his mistakes. But when the envelope was delivered to Evelyn's mansion, she didn't even open it. Marcus placed it gently in a drawer with all the others marked unanswered. Evelyn didn't need to read more empty words. Her life was no longer tied to Daniel's failures. The celebration at the mansion continued late into the evening. Evelyn and Marcus stood together under the string lights draped across the garden. Music played softly, friends laughed nearby, and for the first time in years, Evelyn felt whole. "You know what the best part of today is?" she asked, resting her head lightly against Marcus's shoulder. "What's that?" he replied. "That this isn't a new beginning," she said with a smile. "It's a continuation of the life we've already been building. Today just makes it official." Marcus kissed her forehead, his arm wrapping around her protectively. "Then let's keep building. Together." And in that moment, Evelyn knew she had finally arrived at the life she was meant to live, not one defined by betrayal but by trust, respect, and love that had proven itself in the hardest of times. The years that followed Evelyn and Marcus's wedding only confirmed what those closest to them had already known. Their love wasn't born out of desperation or convenience. It was the natural result of two people who had proven themselves through loyalty, integrity, and shared purpose. Together they built not just a thriving company but also a life grounded in respect and mutual admiration. The Monroe mansion no longer felt haunted by betrayal. Instead, it carried the warmth of family dinners, the sound of laughter spilling through its halls, and the rhythm of a household at peace. Evelyn and Marcus hosted charity galas that raised millions for medical research, expanded the company into 5 new countries, and became symbols of resilience in a world that often doubted the strength of women and overlooked the worth of men like Marcus. For Evelyn, every day was a reminder that love doesn't announce itself with grand gestures or promises. It reveals itself quietly, in the consistency of someone who shows up, who stands firm, who never turns away when life gets hard. Marcus had been that person for her, and now she made sure he knew every single day that his loyalty had not only saved her but transformed her. Meanwhile, Daniel's life continued its slow descent. His final appeal denied, his reputation destroyed, and his connections long abandoned him. Prison life hardened some men, but it hollowed Daniel out. The arrogance that once defined him was gone, replaced by a shell of regret. His cellmates had moved on, his so-called friends in Beverly Hills never visited, and Isabella hadn't spoken his name since the money dried up. The last piece of news about Evelyn and Marcus reached him one quiet afternoon through a business magazine. The cover story showed the couple standing side by side, announcing a major medical foundation that would provide scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing careers in science and medicine. The headline read, "True Power, Evelyn and Marcus Johnson use success to build a legacy." Daniel stared at the cover for hours. His hands shook as he traced Evelyn's smiling face. For the first time he truly understood the depth of his loss. He had tried to steal her fortune, but in doing so, he had thrown away the only chance he ever had to stand beside a woman of true worth. He hadn't just lost money or freedom. He had lost the chance to become better. Back at the mansion, Evelyn stood once more at the tall windows where her story of survival had begun. She thought about the woman she had been, afraid, suspicious, pretending to be broken just to test the man she thought she loved. And then she thought about the woman she had become, strong, clear-eyed, unafraid to fight for herself, and willing to open her heart to someone who had earned it. "Marcus," she said softly one evening as they walked through the garden, "there's something I never properly thanked you for." He turned to her, curious. "What's that?" "You reminded me that strength isn't about facing everything alone. It's about knowing who to trust. You saved me from a life with someone who only saw me as a bank account. And you helped me see what real love looks like." Marcus smiled, his hand warm as it slid into hers. "Evelyn, you saved yourself. All I did was stand where I should have stood from the start. That's what love means, showing up even when no one else does." She squeezed his hand, her heart swelling. "And that's why you're the man I'll always choose." As they walked together beneath the stars, Evelyn felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Daniel's betrayal had once threatened to define her life. But now it was just a distant memory, a painful chapter that had led her to the life she was always meant to live. The true lesson wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishing Daniel, though justice had been served. It was about recognizing that people reveal who they really are when life tests them. Daniel failed because he saw vulnerability as an opportunity to exploit. Marcus passed because he saw dignity worth protecting. Evelyn's greatest victory wasn't in courtrooms or boardrooms. It was in building a life so rich in authenticity and love that betrayal became irrelevant. And so, the story closed not with bitterness but with hope. Evelyn Monroe, once nearly broken by deception, had risen stronger than ever, proving that true love isn't found in charm or wealth but in character. And Daniel Monroe, who mistook manipulation for power, learned too late that integrity will always outlast greed. If this story of resilience, justice, and love touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. Because life has a way of showing us that the right people are often closer than we think, and that real wealth lies not in what we own, but in who we can trust to stand by us when everything else falls away.